Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live at pghcitypaper.com. Email your questions and comments to Lynn at pghcitypaper.com.
Oh yeah. Do I sound like I'm from Wisconsin? I do. It also helps when your nose is a little stuffed. There you go. Good morning. It's Friday. It's October 28th. Next time we're together, it'll be Halloween. And there'll be only 1 week left until the election is over. And guys, I think we're going to make it. We're gonna make it. We are. Oh dear. Where do we start? Where do we start? I do have a guest coming in a little bit later. Look forward to that. There's a lot of stories I haven't really been talking about, I guess because we've been overwhelmed by the election. But the one having to do with the pipeline up in North Dakota, where now I guess over 100 people were arrested last night and cleared from this area where they're trying to put that pipeline through. That is a growing story. It is, and I have not talked about it. And I'm not going to talk about it today. I'm going to educate myself a little bit more about it. I just started trying to delve into it bits and pieces earlier in the week, and none of you have brought it up. It's not getting a lot of major media attention, a lot of attention on the left and left media. But that's about it. It made its way into major network news yesterday because of ongoing violence and or threats of violence and the huge militarized police presence that has been brought into this fight. Speaking of another incident that resulted in standoff and passion, high passion, and arrests. The case in Oregon. I was dumbstruck when I heard last night that these I don't know what to call them. These what? Traitors? Well, they certainly took on the United States government. They seized government property, a wildlife refuge, right? They did it with guns in hand. They held that federal territory for about a month, right? And finally were arrested and charged. And a jury just lets them walk. Well, I am so confused by that verdict. The jury said, I guess the jury thought they were just doing what Americans have the right to do, which is a protest. That's what the juror said. They were just protesting. I'm all for protest, and I'm a strong believer in the First Amendment. But they went well beyond it. That's not protest. That was armed insurrection of a sort. Now, it occurred to me, what if these guys weren't white? It did occur to me. What if these were black guys, armed, who decided to take over some federal land? Or Indians, Native Americans, like what's going on in North Dakota. Let's say they were not white guys. And they decided to do this. Would they have gotten off? Of course not. I mean, of course not. So when people wonder about this phrase that's used quite often, white privilege, if they wonder what that looks like, it looks like what just happened in Oregon. That's what it looks like. Because that verdict would never have been a verdict reached if the defendants were black men. Anybody want to argue that? I think not. Incredible. And a little scary. A little bit scary. And I'm sitting here looking at the front page of the New York Times, and that story is on it's the leftmost column of today's New York Times. The headline, Court Acquits All Defendants in Land Takeover. It's okay. That's fine. Now just go home. That's okay. The story next to it is frighteningly similar, I think. Trump backers see revolution if Clinton wins. That's the next story. Those are the two headlines. One headline, Court Acquits All Defendants in Land Takeover. The second headline, Trump backers see revolution if Clinton wins. Okay, so wait, these are two stories in which a bunch of white people either have or are threatening armed rebellion against the United States. And it ain't too hard to connect the dots when there's cheek to jowl right there in front of your very eyes. That there is in this country now quite a bit of hunger, almost, it feels like to me, to mix it up with the government, to really go after the government. I can assure you that all the people who were acquitted yesterday are Trump supporters. I can assure you these are Trump supporters. And there's these other Trump supporters who are starting to talk open revolution if Trump wins. Doesn't win. And they're saying things like, much like he says, look at all the people at his rallies. I can drive for miles and miles, hundreds of miles, and all I see are Trump signs. If he doesn't win, quite clearly it's been stolen. Now, these are people who, that is what they're seeing. They don't ever see a Hillary sign. And in their heads, where they live, what they experience, what they see, everybody's for Trump. So if he doesn't win, it's been stolen. And of course he's pushing that narrative. So I just want to reiterate that November 9th, this will not be over. This will not be over, and God knows what awaits us. Because the Republicans will go back to doing what Republicans have learned is their, I guess, only reason for being. They will go back to trying to delegitimize yet another Democratic president and to throw every roadblock in her way to spend its time, rather than doing what it is supposed to do, legislate, it will spend investigating the president. and looking for ways to harass her and her staff so that they will not be able to use all of their energies to do what they were elected to do, which is govern. So that's what we're in store for. And the acquittal in Oregon yesterday is an indicator, I think, that we're in for some unsettling times. That's my guess. Ay. So I came across this little bit of sort of a bit of fluff in a bit of fluff section of the also of the Times yesterday, the style section, which I usually look through just to annoy myself. It really does. It just boggles my mind, the superficiality with which so many people just revel in, and it consumes them. The right things to own, the right stuff to have on you, and it freaks me out. It really does. That level of, to me, absolute shallowness. Maybe there's something I don't get. I don't know. But anyway, in the style section, they had a piece on the how difficult it is if you're responsible for seating people at a dinner party. You know, back in the day when you would actually put the names of people where they were to sit. You would invite people to your house, and you would tell them where they were sitting. And in fact, I've done a little of that myself. If I have a bunch of people over and I see husbands and wives, or wives and husbands sitting together, I say, hey, you do that every day. Well, you guys sort of like move apart. Can we mix things up a little bit? Because I really do like to see people meeting other people and having to, there are couples who go out like like in an arm lock, and you can't wrest them away from each other, which I find, again, sort of like the style section, incomprehensible. I do. So anyway, this was about a seating chart, though, for a specific dinner, a dinner which we all witnessed, if we wanted to, and that was that extraordinarily horrific Alfred E. Smith dinner, at which Trump and Clinton and the Cardinal were all in their tuxes and fancy clothes. This is the dinner, by the way, in which George W. Bush, when he was president and or running for, famously said, and I remember bridling about it at the time, but now when I read it, I laughed because he was right. He said, he called the people at the dinner, and as he looked around at this, this wedding cake tiered dais that they're all sitting on, or dais that they're all sitting on, he looked around and he said, well, here I am among the haves and the have-mores. Here we are again, right, the haves and the have-mores. And that is who's there. This is the power. This is the elite, certainly, of New York City. And needless to say, they don't all get along. Needless to say, there are people in that audience who would, like to strangle each other. And so how do you seat them? So they were talking about how you seat these people and what a nightmare it is. And the Cardinal himself thought he had the worst seat in the House. And he said the next day, I'm coming down with a cold, which is completely understandable because I have had a seat between those two candidates in what is probably the iciest place on the planet. He said, where's global warming when you need it, is what the cardinal said the day after. The person who supposedly had the worst seat was actually the wife of the MC, Alfred E. Smith IV or Fifth or Seventh or something. And she was seated between the mayor, de Blasio, and the governor, Cuomo, who hate each other's guts. I have a friend who knows both men, and he said you cannot imagine the level of animosity between these two. You cannot imagine it. Both Democrats hate each other's guts. And this poor woman had to do that whole dinner in between the two of them. And I think it was Hillary Clinton who did reference it. She referenced that they were seated there at the same table. But here's what I wanted to tell you that I learned in reading this article. Trump was not the first candidate to show up there and be booed. I thought he was. I thought never before has this happened. No, it has. And in fact, relatively recent, in my lifetime, and twice it has happened before. One person who was booed was not running for president, but he was the then mayor of New York, John Lindsay. And one former presidential candidate was booed at that dinner, and it was Jimmy Carter. How would Jimmy Carter have been booed? I'm blown away by that. It doesn't tell me why. It does suggest, because it says Trump was hardly the first politician to be booed. Two other Protestants were too. John Lindsay and Jimmy Carter. But Trump wasn't booed because he was a Protestant. And I find it hard to believe that Jimmy Carter was booed because he was a Protestant. And get this. It says here that in 2004, the election between George W. Bush and John Kerry, neither of them were invited. For the first time, the dinner said, we do not want the two candidates here because this is such an ugly election. We don't want these two guys here. They didn't even invite George W. Bush and John Kerry to the Alfred Smith dinner. But somehow they thought it was okay. Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton? I mean, there is no way that the Bush-Kerry race was as polarized. It was ugly, but there's no way it was as polarized as this one. This one, they said, bring it on. Let's do it. So I did not know this. I just wanted to add to our understanding of the Alfred Smith dinner that, in fact, Trump was not the first to be booed. That there have been, and in recent history, times when neither candidate was even invited because it was considered, I guess, that it would kill the whole dinner. And one other thing, on one occasion, Walter Mondale, when he ran and faced a debacle in a week or so later, he didn't show up. Just for what it's worth, okay? So, I have to share a story with you that I did read last night. And this always It puzzles me how I can live in a city and consume as much news as I do and still fail to follow a big story. And I often blame the local media because I say they don't put it together for me. They don't contextualize it. They don't, I don't know, I didn't understand how big this was. This is my feeling when I read the story I read last night in Mother Jones. And it is a story of some length. It's titled, "This Major City's Drinking Water Was Fine. Then came the private water company." And it's about Pittsburgh. And I thought, what? I mean, I know we got some trouble with our water right now, but what? We have a private water company? PWSA is not private? And then I read the story. And maybe you guys are way ahead of me, but good God. I'm just going to throw some of this your way in case, like me, you sort of didn't connect the dots on this one. So a lot of people in Pittsburgh this summer got some very unhappy news from the Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority. In fact, 81,000 residences here. So that's more than 81,000 people. 81,000 houses were informed this summer, "Excuse us, but we thought you should know that we have found elevated levels of lead in your tap water. Maybe you don't want to drink that stuff anymore." "17% of the homes here." Guess what? Somebody in Virginia saw a little snippet about this, and his eyes opened real wide. His name is Mark Edwards. He is a professor at Virginia Tech who helped expose the water crisis in Flint, Michigan. And he saw it and said this: "The levels in Pittsburgh are comparable to those reported in Flint." Okay, well, right there. If that's true, why aren't there headlines in our local media like 3 inches high? Why don't I know more about this? Why don't I understand this story? And it's for the same reason. What happened here is what happened in Flint. Let me explain. I had to go to Mother Jones to get this tied together for me. I always bragged about Pittsburgh water. It was said to be like just the best water you could have. It was fine. You can drink right from the tap. But the reality is we do have really old infrastructure here. We've got 100-year-old water pipes, and we had a Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority, which was run by apparently gerbils or something. I don't know. They got themselves hundreds of millions of dollars in debt, and it's not like that is unusual for an older city. Utilities around the country are facing the same kind of thing: crumbling old infrastructure and not enough public funding, not enough money to do necessary repairs. So what Pittsburgh did, and here's where I missed the boat, we hired a company based in Paris, France, to run the PWSA, our Water and Sewer Authority. This French company operates in 68 countries and has also had contracts with utilities just recently signed with New York City, Washington, D.C. This is a very rich company that goes in and runs what are public utilities for a price. So this is a private company brought in to run a struggling public utility. And we hired these guys in 2012 to manage the day-to-day operations, to give us an interim executive team, and they brought in a guy named Jim Good. And he started making changes all over the place, and wow, it seemed to be working. All of a sudden, customer service worked better. All of a sudden, this happened. All of a sudden, that. There was this, the Post-Gazette did this story in 2013 about how Good now had lunch and barbecues with employees, and they quoted him as saying, "I told them we were here to work with the employees as their partners. I provided assurances that there wouldn't be any layoffs and that together we could achieve anything." But by the end of last year, Mr. Good had laid off or fired a whole bunch of folks, including, get this, the safety manager and the water quality manager, and the heads of finance and the heads of engineering, and the laboratory. Those are the guys that are sitting there trying to see if the water's okay all the time. The lab, which was totally responsible for testing the quality of the water that we get out of our taps, he cut that staff in half. And the guy who had headed water quality in Pittsburgh for 36 years, he was called Dr. Water. Stanley States is his name. 36 years. He got transferred to a desk job in the research department. He understood what that meant. He retired. And then something happened to our water. As the lab staff was shrunk, Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority made major changes to its water treatment system. For decades, they had always put soda ash, it's like baking soda ash, a chemical, into our water. And it was there to prevent our old pipes from leaching, from corroding, and then consequently leaching lead and other stuff into the water. This is what Flint was using too. Until the bean counters came in. And like in Flint, the guys from France changed what we were adding to our water, soda ash. They took it away and put in a cheaper corrosion control system. In order to do that, they were supposed to get the okay of the Department of Environmental Protection. They did not. They did not inform the city. They just did it. And then, as news spread about the disaster in Flint, guess what? The guys over at the Public Water and Sewer Authority quickly switched back to the soda ash. Too late. Because it was in that interim where they went to the cheap stuff that the pipes weren't, safeguarded, and that corrosion did happen, and lead was leaching into our water. According to Mother Jones, the mayor, Peduto, says that the company never informed the utilities board, never informed the city. And just months ago, the state cited the PWSA for breaking state law and ordered immediate lead testing. And that's when people started getting letters, because the test showed that the city's lead levels had, for the first time, exceeded federal standards. 17% of homes had levels above the EPA's action level. So, why isn't this a bigger story? And do you know if your water is okay? I haven't had mine tested. Do you even know if what you're cooking with and drinking, it could well be as crappy as the water in Flint? The PWSA has now announced it's suing the French company. Last December, Pittsburgh terminated its contract with the company. The damage is clearly done. 2 months after we sued them, the Michigan Attorney General charged the French company with fraud and negligence for failing to discover Flint's lead contamination problem. You see, Flint hired the same company to consult on its water quality. Isn't that amazing? And the Michigan Attorney General says that the French company stated that the water was safe, and went so far as to dismiss the medical and health concerns that had been forwarded to it about what was happening in Flint by saying, quote, this is incredible. The French company said, well, some people may be sensitive to water. So, the French company is denying responsibility in Flint. It's denying responsibility in Pittsburgh. It's denying responsibility all over. But if you want to read a story that pulls together for you what should have been pulled together for you by our local media, check out Mother Jones. And I just saw it. Pittsburgh's drinking water was fine. Then came the private water company. So, stuff we don't know. Bless you over there, Celine. It's good you can do a quiet sneeze. I can't do quiet sneezes. They are beyond me. I'm always thinking that if you do that, you're liable to blow your brains out somehow. I mean, like the force of that, like when you sit on something that explosive, it seems to me you could have trouble. That's what my guess is. So feel free to sneeze.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, guys. So that's my little bit of disquieting news for the day. That was more than enough, don't you think? We're being poisoned. There'll be armed insurrection in the streets within months. And other than that, everything's fine. So, we do have a guest. And I'm going to sort of pull myself over here. And, Pat, I'm just going to ask you to pull yourself over here, too. Thank you. This is Pat McCardle. How do I identify you?
A Pittsburgh guy
A Pittsburgh guy? That's it?
who loves Pittsburgh history
Okay.
and the people who made it great.
There you go. It's just a Pittsburgh guy. Found him on the street, and he just really likes Pittsburgh,
Almost.
and it's just almost. No, we bumped into. You don't have to wear those unless we take calls. Bumped into each other at a benefit, and started talking, and he told me a story that I just found so fascinating that I said, "You gotta come on the show and tell everybody this story." You also have to pull over here a little bit more. Ooh, here we go. So, you see that naked man? Well, we're going to talk about him somewhat, but I want to lead up to that. Wow, what a... So, our story starts, Pat, with the fact that you came to me and said something about the Greenfield Bridge. You said, the Greenfield Bridge that was and is no more. For those of you who don't live in my neck of the woods, that's the bridge that went over the Parkway East, pretty much right before, if you're heading outbound, you headed into the Squirrel Hill.
From Shenley Park to Greenfield.
From Shenley Park, exactly. It took you from Shenley Park right into Greenfield.
It was once the most beautiful bridge in Pittsburgh. It had these urns, these beautiful light standards, and I actually lived on the bridge in 1980.
What do you mean you lived on the bridge? You can't live on a bridge.
Oh, yeah.
You can live under it if you're a troll, but
there was a little house on the end of the Greenfield Bridge, and it's been taken down for the new bridge.
Are you kidding? On the Greenfield side, there was a little house.
Yes.
And you lived in that?
Yes, I did. And I lived in it during the time that they supposedly were going to refurbish it, but they stripped it of all its beauty, put up a chain link fence, and then they worked underneath it. And as you remember...
Oh, is that when they put up that stupid thing under it to catch any falling debris?
Because after they fixed it, then 10 years later it started to fall apart.
After they fixed it, it started to fall apart. Why is that reminiscent of the story I was just telling before? Save us from the experts, please. Please.
So now it is no longer.
It is no longer, but it is being
They're
replaced.
replacing actually it's the Beechwood Boulevard Bridge is its official name, but it's always been known
It's the Greenfield.
locally as the Greenfield Bridge. But on the pillar it says the Beechwood Boulevard Bridge, and that's the intended name, unless we can do something about it, for
Okay.
the new bridge.
Why would it be called the Beechwood Boulevard Bridge? That's not Beechwood Boulevard.
That's where Beechwood Boulevard either ends or starts.
Really? Huh. Well, that's news to me.
My address was 4501 Beechwood
Beechwood.
Boulevard. when I lived there,
Really? Huh. That's weird to me. Okay, all right. So, why are we talking about this bridge? There's a million bridges in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And obviously you have history with this bridge, which is why you would care about it so much. But you have a specific desire to see this bridge named after a Pittsburgh person.
A man who worked on the bridge in 1922 as a laborer at the age of 62. His name is John Kane. He was a working man, and all his life he came from Scotland to Braddock at the age of 19, and he worked building Andrew Carnegie's Edgar Thomson Works. He also worked down in Frick's coal and coke mines. And
so he's a Scottish immigrant who was
he's an immigrant.
doing hard labor. So this would
all his life. He
life.
started at 9 years old in the shale mines in Scotland. So he has virtually no education from school.
No, but I just want to back up, because when you say John Kane, a lot of people say, "Well, I know that name. I know that name. There's a big building in Oakland named after Kane. There's all these Kane things that are named after.
Well,
That's not the same guy.
No.
So
he's a politician.
There was a John Kane politician.
Yeah, different middle name, middle initial.
Okay, but that's why when people hear John Kane, they think, oh, yeah, we've honored him. This is not that John Kane. This is the John Kane you don't know.
This is the heroic
This
John
is a
Kane.
heroic John Kane.
The working man, John Kane.
The working man, John Kane. So this guy's working since he was a kid at physical labor, comes to the United States, ends up working for another Scot who came here,
That's right.
Carnegie.
And he paints him.
And he paints him.
Well, that's...
You want to get ahead of it.
Well,
What?
I don't know.
Okay, well, go ahead. What do you mean he paints him?
Well, John Kane in later years becomes a painter of canvases. And this is how he's known throughout the art world and here in Pittsburgh. He was the most famous Pittsburgh artist until Andy Warhol becomes the most famous Pittsburgh artist. Only John Kane stays here his whole life.
Unlike Warhol, left.
Well, Andy's work is New York work, except for the few Carnegie Tech pieces. But John Kane's work
All
is,
Pittsburgh.
It's paintings of Pittsburgh, which he so loved, and he never leaves.
Okay, so that's where we're heading. But if we were because you were telling us this is a poor guy who's working in the Coke.
He's a poor guy when he's a famous artist too.
He's a poor guy all his life.
He's buried in Calvary Cemetery in Greenfield in an unmarked grave.
All right. Okay. And yet, since you've already said he's an artist, his work hangs in the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. It hangs at the Carnegie, and he lies in an unmarked grave.
And his work hangs in the Metropolitan with all the modern artists of the world and the folk artists. He never had a lesson.
His stuff, I mean, I started looking at it. It's just wonderful.
Well,
and in some ways, if you talk to an art historian type, is he the first kind of where they say, oh, wow, this is like primitive in its way. He's unschooled in the work of art. And so after him, they then discover Grandma Moses, who was also...
She's much later. She's
much later.
He's 1927 discovery. She's 1940.
Okay. But it was his art, this unschooled art, which I think they call primitive.
Primitive, naive, self-taught,
Yeah.
outsider, all these terms. Yes, he's the first. He's the granddaddy of all of it, and he's our guy. And
you figure, here's a guy. His physical labor helped build that beautiful Greenfield Bridge, which we just tore down.
And he also paved. He put the paving, the Belgian block, the cobblestones.
Yeah.
He paved from Fifth Avenue out to Oakland. He worked in McKeesport in the Tube. He painted boxcars.
He didn't paint pretty things on box. He painted.
Well, actually, that's
flat,
where he
flat.
started to. Yes, but during his lunch hour, he would put landscapes on there, and then, instead of eating, he would paint and then cover them over before the.
Oh gosh, can you imagine what those?
Yeah.
How beautiful those trains would have looked if he hadn't.
He's first a graffiti artist.
Yeah. I'm thinking he's like
the first pop artist. And Lynn, I'd like to bring this up. We're talking about him, and he's born in 1860. He dies in 1934. He's pretty much, except for those who study art history or really love the city and know so much history about it, he's pretty much forgotten.
Yes.
But about 6 months ago, a book came out called The Long March of Pop. I should have brought it.
The Long March of Pop.
And it's all about how pop art came about. So on the cover is a Andy Warhol gold Marilyn, and
this
a
guy.
couple pages in is
this self-portrait?
Is this?
This is a self-portrait of John Kane. Is
And
this
he's
at MoMA?
Yes.
This is the one that the Museum of Modern Art has.
And he's 67 years old. And I was wondering, would you be kind enough to read the foreword, the first paragraph of the foreword? I have it marked here.
Okay. Well, sure.
Just this first paragraph.
Yes, sir.
This was written in 1938.
Few careers.
Yes.
Few careers in the long history of art have been more singular than that of John Kane. Everything in it seems to have come from the other side of probability. Search Vasari's Lives of the Artists from the beginning to end, and you will find in them no more magnificent paradox than this, that an immigrant day laborer who had no time to paint, no money to paint, no earthly provocation or encouragement to paint, should yet emerge at the age of 67 as the most significant painter America has produced during the past quarter century. Wow.
That's Frank Crocenfield, who was the editor of Vanity Fair and one of the founders of the Museum of Modern Art.
Wow.
And that's
So,
what they thought of him then.
that makes my, I get goosebumps because here is a guy, who helped not only build our city, literally, but that we don't know him, or that we don't celebrate him, or
So, yes, Lynn, and here is the most fantastic opportunity. We don't build new bridges too often.
No.
And we have named some. We have the Clemente Bridge. We have the
Rachel Carson Bridge, the David McCullough Bridge, yada, yada. Those are the four that I'm thinking
But
of.
we have nothing in this city who we always celebrate. The immigrant labor built this country, built this city, and he is the epitome of the immigrant.
Of someone coming over, unschooled, working his life, never gaining any monetary anything, and leaves a legacy.
Even when he does start to sell in the last couple of years, after the Carnegie International, he gets in there in 1927 because the juror, Andrew Dasbaugh, said, because he was this juror who studied Cubism and was in Europe in the good days, he was looking for the American Rousseau, and that's what he found, and that's what he was known as.
The American
John Kane
Rousseau.
was known as the American Rousseau. So even after he gets in the Carnegie International, and he's in every year after that, and then also the Associated Artist shows, and his work starts to get bought, but only like for $50 and $100 and things like that. And he does win some prizes.
I bet there are people in Pittsburgh who have paintings of his in their homes who don't have a clue
Let's go find them.
how valuable they are. I bet there are. Well, stop and think about it.
Well, years ago,
wouldn't he be giving these things away? Wouldn't people have said, "I'll give you $2 for that"?
Well, I knew a woman artist, Mary Shaw, who they called the Grande Dame of Pittsburgh art. I knew her in her 80s, and she had the first modern art gallery downtown here. And she said John Kane used to come and try to sell paintings, and to her for like $5, and she didn't buy them, but she would give him a ride home. And he also was a guy who he has 2 daughters and a wife, and then he so wants to have a son, and his son is born, but he dies the next day of typhoid.
Oh.
And this sent him back into a spiral. He was so hurt, devastated by that he started to drink again. So he's an Irish parents, and he's a Scotsman, and he likes to fight and he likes to drink as a youth, and this got him back to drinking. And then there was a 25-year separation between he and his wife. Intermittently, they would.
She'd come back. Yeah, they'd come.
And it
back
wasn't
together.
until 1927 when she's in D.C. and he's living here in the Strip District, up by Old St. Patrick's Church. He just has one room with a bed in the middle of it, and that's where he's doing his paintings. And he gets discovered, and Marie McSwiggan, who writes this book, wrote for the Pittsburgh Press. And so it's big news in all the papers. House painter in the Carnegie International. And she, Mrs. Kane, is in Washington, D.C., living with her daughters, and she reads this in a New York paper, and she comes back, and it's an evening, and he hears a rap on his door, and there was just a little shadow of a light, and he said, it was like a ghost, and it was herself, Mrs. Kane. She came back. And
Well, she came back because now he had money?
No,
you don't think?
Because he never had money, and he still had to paint as a house painter for the next 2 years until the Depression hit so bad, and he's 70 years old, he can't find any work.
So how much would his work sell for today?
Well, Meg and I saw a piece in the Art Dealers Association show. Jane Collier, who was at one time handled his estate, there was a painting for, I think, about $130,000, $125,000. Well, he only painted about 130 paintings.
Jeez.
Oh, but you were saying about maybe you could find a painting. Well, when my son Reese was young, I was friendly with Leon Arcus, who did a show in 1966 and there was a Kane, Hicks, and Pippin, 3 Pennsylvania primitives, and there's a catalog of it. So he knew my interest in Kane, and we would talk of Kane. And he said, well, Pat, out in Pitcairn, there's a lost painting. John Kane painted a church out there, and he had a photograph of it. So Reese and I went out looking. He said, see if you can find it. So we went out to this little Catholic church, which was no longer a wooden church with a circular window. Now it's a brick church with the same circular window. So we did that. We went up, knocked on the door, and the priest came out, but no John Kane.
Someone had it just wasn't there. I'm telling you, there are people in this town who've got to have this guy's work and don't even realize they're sitting on a gold mine. That's my bet. That's my bet. So back to what you think, John Kane. Here is a guy, we've left out a point that just blew me away. He's building, one of the laborers building that beautiful bridge in
1922, 5 years before he's known as a painter of canvases.
In 1922, he's building the bridge we just took down. Oh. And he's doing it.
Well, you know how he's doing it? He's doing it as the oldest.
He was the oldest laborer.
62 years old, plus he's working with a wooden leg because he had lost his leg at the age of 31.
In a train accident. So John Kane has one leg, and he's still working as a laborer. Mm-hmm. That's beyond belief to me.
And then he would get away from the work anytime he could, and he would go up to Calvary Cemetery, where he loved cemeteries, and he loved to be there and the peace of it. And that's where he paints his industrial masterpieces at the Metropolitan Museum.
That's at the Met.
From Calvary, looking down into Homestead, with the old Homestead Browns Bridge and the plant and the...
So if you go to the Metropolitan Museum, it's hanging there.
Yes.
Pittsburgh, as John Kane saw it. This uncelebrated, locally uncelebrated son. And it's mind-boggling. So,
well, here's what's going on. Here's an opportunity to have this happen. And the process is that the mayor has set up a commission for naming public properties, and it has 3 commissioners: Public Works, the head of Public Works, City Parks, and City Planning.
They make up this commission that decides what things will be named.
And they want to see that the community, it has backing from the community, and that the person is deceased and has made some sort of a mark, which he certainly covers that. So November 14th is a meeting, and we have a website.
Okay.
It's called Raising the Kane Bridge, Kane, and there's an online petition there.
Okay, Raising the Kane Bridge.
Kane Bridge. And
so you got to show that Pittsburghers think this would be a fine idea, a man.
Well, you know, Lynn, it's a fine idea for him, but he even says when he finally gets in the Carnegie International, he said he's lived among the poor all his life, and he's worked all this stuff. So any accolade, any honor coming from man is great, but unless it comes from God, and he was a daily communicant at Epiphany Church at 6:15 Mass every day. So it's not so much, wouldn't John Kane love to have a bridge named for him? It's more
it
like
doesn't matter.
it's more, isn't it incumbent on
us.
Pittsburghers to learn what he has done,
Right.
to have him as a beacon for the youth. I've been quoted at one time saying that this book should be required reading for every school kid in Pittsburgh.
And if you're interested, I mean, you got it. Okay, this looks like a library book, but it's not.
Well, it's
Skyhooks. Why is it called that?
because of the
This is
painting.
the
When
book.
he would paint, the scaffolding would hang from skyhooks.
So he's painting scaffolding as his day job.
This is a
You know, he almost looks like American Gothic. I mean, he looks like Woody Guthrie. You know, he does.
Mm-hmm.
There he is. This guy is a Pittsburgh treasure. And maybe you guys knew about him, like you knew about the water thing I told you about. Maybe you did, but I never had heard of him. And I love the idea that bridge would have his name, as opposed to, what is there,
the Beechwood Boulevard Bridge.
is that what they're going to call it again?
Currently,
It's still going to be called, which no one will call it.
No,
they'll,
no.
they'll call it the Greenfield Bridge. And maybe even if it were named the John Kane Bridge, it'll still, locals will say
that's fine because the Homestead Grays Bridge is, people say the high level Homestead
Yes,
high level
that's
bridge,
right.
and it's always like that, and that's okay. But what we could do is have a historical marker,
Right.
a Pennsylvania historical marker, because there's none for him. There's none for Andy Warhol either, a historical marker anywhere.
On his bridge, there's not? He's got a bridge now.
Yeah, but there's no Pennsylvania historic marker, and they lived within blocks of each other.
Warhol and
Well,
Kane?
Andy's born in 28, and he dies in 34, and they both live in South Oakland. He lived on Ophelia Street, and
I
Andy lives
mean-
on Dawson.
That's really something. That's really something.
You know,
So Pittsburgh, you know, guys, I see this statistic a lot, and I don't think anyone would believe it. But more people in Pittsburgh go to our museums in a year than attend a sporting event here. I mean, I think that's hard to believe. We
Well, you don't-
celebrate our sports.
I want one little anecdote. In, say, I'm not sure what year, somewhere in the teens, I think, or early 20s. Do you know the beautiful murals of industry in the Carnegie Museum?
Yes.
You know, where the grand staircase is and all those beautiful murals?
Yes.
Well, they were painted by John White Alexander, who was a famous painter and a portrait painter living in D.C. at the time, but he's from the north side of Pittsburgh.
Okay.
Well, John Kane would go to the library and look at art and go to the library, look at art books to try to learn how to do faces and things, but he would also look at the art in the museum. Well, when those were being painted, John Kane, leaving his work, goes over there, and he may have been out of work, because he was out of work. It was always tough. And he asked to be an assistant to paint those murals. And John White Alexander said, "Well, what do you do?" And he said, "Well, I'm a painter." It's a I
House
paint houses
painter.
and stuff.
I'm a house painter.
I mean, just the fact that he thought, and because he knew his work was good. I mean, he always believed in the beauty of his work and the beauty of Pittsburgh. And he never paints Pittsburgh with a gray anything.
Even though it was at the time.
Yeah, very grimy.
It was beautiful to him.
It was beautiful to him. He loved it, and he loved Kennywood. But just that a guy like him would go into where the swells are and where one of the most famous painters in the country is
At the
doing
time,
his-
is doing a mural.
and he's going to
Can
help
I?
him.
Can I
I'll
help?
help.
So the guy just said no.
Well, he
you
said,
know.
"Come back," and then he said that he didn't need any help, or it was filled or something.
Wow. So that's the story I wanted to tell you. A little history. And go to raisingthekainebridge.com. And that's all one, right?
Yes.
And and sign the petition, because I just love to give this guy his due. And go find this book, Skyhooks. It is such an amazing.
We all need a hero, especially nowadays. And here's our own.
Indeed. Here's a real deal. A Pittsburgh working guy. Never expected much of anything, but left us treasure. Real treasure.
Lynn,
Yeah.
Lynn, when you find the John Kane painting, can I be one of the first to see it?
Yes, if I find it. And it'll be my own Antiques Roadshow. I am going to blow somebody's mind. I am going to blow someone's mind.
Mine.
Thank you so much,
thank you.
Pat McCardle, and thank you guys, and I'll talk at you again on Monday. Have a great weekend. Bye.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper, Steel City Media, and its advertisers.